things are happening that have never, ever, ever happened before. To my audio listeners, I am so sorry that you don't get to see this treat of a costume or outfit for this episode, because if you're listening on audio, I'll give you a second to go switch over and watch video, because first of all, why am I serving? What I'm serving, you may be asking? I'm serving first wedding, newlywed, chic newlywed. And based on today's subject matter, I thought it would be nothing but fitting then to go to my mom's house, take her wedding dress, get a veil off Amazon, and sit down and talk about the wedding ceremony of the spring that we got to witness in the new A24 film, The Drama, starring Zendaya and Robert Pattinson. Before we get into that, I must tell you how difficult it is to find a wedding dress on such short notice. Not even just a wedding dress, just like a white dress in general. We're in the season of pastels and white clothes. So I'm sitting here thinking, okay, I could just find a store at the mall, get a white dress, call it a day. I search high and low, Macy's, Belk's, JCPenney, Windsor, because there's a Windsor still open here in Charlotte. Nothing. So I do what I do best. Everybody says nobody's coming to save you, but my mother always will. I go into our family group chat. Hey, mommy. Where's your wedding dress? Do you know where it is by any chance? She said, yes, it's in my closet. What about it? I tell her all about how I want to do this podcast episode, because this week's episode is actually supposed to be about sinners, but I've been so consumed with the drama, I thought we would do something a little bit more new and fun. And the movie hasn't even been out for a week by the time that this is coming out. I saw it not even a full 5 days ago. So it's still very fresh and new, and it's now starting to pick up some traction in terms of box office sales, and people are chittering and chattering about it. So I tell her, hey, I want to do a podcast episode. I thought it'd be funny if I wore a wedding dress, da-da-da. And she's like, you know what? It's ready for you when you need it. If you ever wonder why I surround myself with the people I do, it is because my antics seem like antics to the average person until I explain it and walk them through why my antics are the way that they are, and then they get it and they co-sign it. This is peak example of, one, my mom will always support my antics if it's good for the bit, and two, if I didn't have a mom that supported my antics for the bit, I probably would be miserable. I'm not gonna lie. Because what do you mean? She had her wedding dress professionally sealed so it didn't yellow. This dress is from the early 2010s. Easily 10 plus years old. Somewhere between 10 and 15 years old. I know it's not 15, but I know it's not 10. It might be 12 or 13, maybe close to 14 years old at this point. Probably 12 or 13. I think 13, maybe. I don't know. I don't know what year it is. I was young when my mom got remarried. Sealed airtight, tagged in several places to fit on the body piece so it can stay in the box and keep its shape. And she's just like, oh, it's sealed. And I'm sitting here we don't have to break the seal. I got one off Amazon just in case this didn't work. And she was like, no, we can break it. It's fine. Mind you, had to send the dress to New York to get it sealed. She probably could have got it sealed somewhere in North Carolina, but I don't know why she sent it to New York, but it got sealed in New York and shipped back to her for preservation. And she was like, yeah, we can open. I don't care. I'm pretty sure. First of all, thank you, mommy, for letting me use this, because like I said, we're dedicated to the bit. I'm pretty sure if anybody else's child came to them and said, can I have your wedding dress that's sealed airtight for preservation for something I'm going to take an hour or two to do, they would say no. But because my mom is, in fact, a mirror of me, she co-signs the antics. She supports the antics in ways I cannot describe, and she will always be my number one supporter. So, all in unison, I need us to say thank you, because without her, I would not be wearing her wedding dress. Now, let me go about this whole thing. So, I got it yesterday. I picked it up from my mom's house yesterday. And I don't know if it's because I'm only 23, I'm going to be 24 next month, but seeing myself in a wedding dress kind of freaked me out. And I don't know if it's because I think I'm too young to be doing something like this, or I just don't see myself getting married anytime soon. There's a lot of things going through my head, but the only thing that really, really, really freaked me out was the concept of getting married right now. I don't know why it freaked me out that bad, because I'm not somebody who's like, oh, I never want to get married. I would love to get married in this lifetime. I absolutely would. But I don't know, something about seeing me in an all white floor length gown with a train and a veil freaked me out a little. But then I had to lock in. Because if the concept of me being in a wedding dress at 23 freaked me out, imagine finding out the worst thing that your partner has ever done after 2 and 3 and 4 bottles of wine, and it actually changing how you look at them as it's your wedding week. You're probably wondering, Aliyah, that's very random. Where did you pull that from? That's the synopsis of a new movie, the new movie I think of the spring, probably one of the most polarizing movies I think of 2026, the drama starring Zendaya and Robert Pattinson. So, this movie has been marketed to us for a few months now, and last year when I started catching wind that this movie was coming out, it was easily one of my most highly anticipated movies of the year, up there with Project Hail Mary, The Odyssey, Spider-Man Brand New Day, and a few other movies coming out later this year. I don't know who is blowing up my phone right now, but I need them to chill out right now, because we're talking about the drama. So, let me text them back. Okay, there we go. So, going into this movie, I was so excited because I get to see two of my favorite actors, Zendaya, Robert Pattinson. And then A24 has become one of my favorite movie production companies, because people think A24 is all about stunning visuals, when although their visuals are usually always stunning, I find them to be one of the companies that actually like to step out of the box and give newer directors chances, and taking chances on new creatives, writers, producers, and whatnot. So I like A24 for what they do for the younger generation of film creatives, right? So we're getting the marketing for this movie. We're getting wedding pictures. We're getting Zendaya, Robert Pattinson, amazing magazine shoots and editorial shoots in terms of stylistic choices. And they're just letting them have a good time. And honestly, I don't know what I enjoyed more. My excitedness to see the movie, or my excitedness / anxious feeling of seeing, anxious in a good way. My highly positive feeling of seeing these marketing campaigns. We're seeing movie posters. We're seeing, like I said, editorial shoots. We're seeing interviews. And I'm getting so excited to see this movie. And then the movie starts coming out. And because the internet does what the internet does, people start talking. And I see the movie a day before it comes out, but of course, some people see it earlier for exclusive releases or test releases and whatnot. So reviews are coming out. People are starting to talk. This is pre-embargo lift when it comes to talking about the movie. So I'm sitting here going through Instagram. Also, this is going to be as spoiler-free as I can make it. I'll let you know if there's any spoilers, but this is going to be as spoiler-free as I can absolutely make this, because the movie just came out not even a week ago, and I don't want to expose you to the spoiler if you're really big on spoilers happening for you. I don't really care if spoilers happen, because in my opinion, the most exciting part about a movie is the exposition to the big thing / twist that happens, but not everybody's like that. So I was going through Instagram one day. I was reading the comments about the movie and what people were thinking about it as before it was coming out. And somebody said, I think she did X, Y, and Z. And when I originally saw the trailer, there was one thing, because I saw the trailer a long time ago, as most of us did. The whole bit is like, what's the worst thing you've ever done? Like, there's a group of friends testing out some wines or drinking wine together, and they ask, what's the worst thing you've ever done? And then it cuts to the friends being like, are you serious? And I had a very certain idea on what could be that insane that the whole vibe is cut so quickly. So I went into the movie with this notion / this idea of already what the twist was / what Zendaya's character Emma does. And I had that idea come to mind, and I was like, oh, there's no way that's what she did, because people are usually too scared to touch upon things like that because it's a very touchy topic, especially in a culture that hits close to home. So I just kind of wave it off. That's kind of like my preconceived notion of what happened. So as I'm going through these Instagram comments months later, a few weeks later, and somebody says, oh, I don't know how true this is, but the streets are saying she did X, Y, and Z, and that's what I already thought would happen. And I was like, oh, like, I really don't think a movie would try to do something like that, da-da-da-da. It's time to sit in and watch the movie. I'm sitting in the top row like I normally do at my AMC theater of choice. Free ticket, of course. I bought my sister's ticket because I'm A-list. She's not. Duh. Not duh. I'm trying to get her to get A-list, but she's taking her time. Whatever. The movie begins, and I automatically want to say, before we really get into the plot and the deep dive and the whole reason I wanted to sit and talk about this. So, this movie was marketed as a romance movie to an extent. It was a rom-com. It was a romance comedy that it was marketed as. And like I said, it was starring Zendaya / it is starring Zendaya and Robert Pattinson. And the director, who I personally have never seen any other of their work, named Christopher Borgli, a director who is not from the States, I believe. I'm actually fairly confident they're not from the States. I think they're from Norway, if I'm not mistaken. Please correct me if I'm wrong. I forgot to write it down. Sorry. But like I said, I went in having a feeling of what she did. It kind of got spoiled / confirmed via Instagram comments. And I knew it got confirmed / spoiled via Instagram comments because when I sat down and we started watching the movie, what I had went in happened. So, like I said, there were so many fun aspects of this movie that I personally really enjoyed, from the comedic timing to the performances to the score. Everything about it, in my opinion, was just really fun. It made it a fun movie. But the thing that made it not so fun, you may be wondering, let me take a sip of water real quick. Was knowing the discourse that was going to shortly come up from this movie. Now, like I said, this movie has some very touchy subject matter that touches very close to home to a lot of victims, specifically in a culture that is very close to home. Actually, it is home. So, like I said, I'm not going to spoil much of the movie, if any of the movie, because it hasn't even been a week. But if you are looking for a spoiler-free conversation, this is definitely it. I probably will talk a little bit more about it in detail, maybe at the end if I remember / want to, but for right now, this is spoiler-free. Basically, the entire movie is a movie that I enjoyed. They had all the moving parts. They had the technical stuff good, the cinematography was good, the score was good, performances were good. I think the writing was well done. It felt very natural. The characters felt very lived in from our two protagonists, Emma, who's played by Zendaya, and Charlie, played by Robert Pattinson. Overall, it checked all my boxes. It was beautifully shot. The colors were good. I think the pacing was good. And I think something that really stuck out to me the most when it came to this movie was, in fact, the editing. Because instead of us getting a really, really, really boring backstory and covering and getting introduced to Charlie and Emma as a couple, we basically get caught up to speed by being brought through Charlie's process as he's writing his speech for his wedding that is this upcoming weekend of the movie's timeline. So this movie takes place over a week or so, less than a week. And we basically hit all the notes when it comes to Charlie and Emma's relationship without having to be sat down and told it using the characters' dialogue, which I really, 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 really liked in a time where we are getting second screen content in dialogue and scripts. This was very nice to me. Immediately had me hooked. And it's so interesting using the gift of retrospective and seeing how they shot and edited this. It was very interesting looking back at the beginning, and I can't wait to go see it again so I can pick up on more things. But it was just a very, very, very good choice, in my opinion, to kind of thrust the audience really into their lives with very little boring exposition. The editing really stuck out to me. I'm a very firm believer in show, not tell. And I think this did an amazing balance of both, but mainly showing. So I will always appreciate that. So we're going throughout the movie, learning more and more about Charlie and Emma's relationship. You can kind of see that both of them are kind of awkward. You see some of their highest moments, such as their first kiss, their first date, when they first met, and things like that. And there are some things that happen within the movie that I think are hilarious. Like, for example, Charlie sees Emma get up to get rid of her cup at the cafe that they met at, and he goes over, takes a picture of the book that she's reading, and reads the Goodreads synopsis to find a reason to talk to her about a book he's never read. Some people find that creepy. Some people find it endearing. Wherever you fall on that spectrum, I think, wherever you fall. I thought it was funny. I definitely side-eyed a little bit in an age where men are definitely just doing anything to talk to people. I was siding a little bit, but I was like, at the end of the day, it ended up in a wholesome relationship. He had zero malice, so I was cool with it. I thought it was funny. It was cutesy, and we progressed to the movie. We're going throughout these last-minute wedding things, such as wine tasting, da-da-da, and this is where the big bad twist comes up in the movie. It comes up very early in the movie. And we basically have a really good characterization of Charlie and Emma at this point, from what I remember. You can kind of see what their relationship is like through their dance lessons that they have for the wedding. You can kind of see how they interact with each other. You get to know them very well as characters. So by the time at this point in the movie, they feel familiar. They feel friendly. So when we get to this point in the movie where their friend, Charlie's friend's wife named Rachel, spoiler, don't like that lady. Don't like that lady. Don't like that lady. She pulls out this game that her and her now husband played before they got married, where they shared the worst thing that they've ever done. Several red flags for several reasons. First of all, Rachel has in turn become friends with Emma because, their proximity. Emma's getting married to her husband's friend, whatever. So she's her maid of honor for the wedding, da-da-da-da. My beef with this whole scenario was Rachel brought this up and aired out information that her husband shared with her in private and in confidence that they swore they would never talk about again. And she brought it up in front of their two friends. First red flag with Rachel. First red flag with Rachel. So they're going around the table. In my opinion, the things that they say they have done are pretty tame. Out of the three, Charlie, Rachel, and I forgot her husband's name, Charlie's friend, Rachel had the worst one out of the three until Emma spoke. When Emma says her truth after glasses of wine, Rachel flips her. She flips her. She does. And this is where things begin to take a turn for the plot, because this is when we begin figuring out what this movie is actually going to entail. So the rest of the movie, we're following Emma and Charlie as they're navigating this new information that Emma brought to the table after a wine-drunken night. One of my mutuals on Letterboxd, Jameson, hey diva, he wrote in his Letterboxd review, what kind of wine were they drinking for her to scare the like that? And honestly, my first conditional response after reading that review, I said real, because I need to know. Second of all, I know it wasn't Stella Rosa, but immediately my head was Stella Rosa, because the girls really get sloppy off of Stella. Stella Blueberry, to be specific. It's me. I'm the girls. I don't air out things like this, because I never did anything like that. But I just thought it was a funny Letterboxd review. And And the whole scene I think was really well shot, and I think it really shows the complexities of confiding in and thinking you know everybody, and ignorance actually being bliss, because after this moment Emma's dynamic changes with everybody at the table in that moment right there. Also, to my people who have a fear of vomit, they do in fact have 3 throw up scenes in this movie. One is when Emma's at the table. The second one is the morning after, because I think she's hungover, and well, the first one at the table, she's definitely just too drunk. She said she was too drunk. Secondly, it's the morning after, she's hungover. She probably feels sick due to anxiety. The third one is Charlie after the wedding. So the wedding does happen. Spoiler. Kind of. Because we see the promotional pictures and we see clips throughout the movie where they are clearly going through with their last minute wedding plans, right? So we spend the rest of this movie seeing how Emma and Charlie's dynamic has changed now that he has learned about the worst thing that Emma had done. And I think this opens up a lot of conversations, especially when it comes to the central themes of the movie. Let me list out for you some that I picked up. I could be missing some. We have intention versus impact, personal growth, ignorance is bliss, are we always who we once were, where do we draw the line with empathy, how much can we forgive, truth versus security in relationships, in terms of, are you fine living in this pillowed reality of not knowing every single dark thing that your partner has thought about doing or has actually done? Like, are you okay with not knowing that if it means you are comfortable? But does that also mean that you're okay with not knowing everything about them? And I think this movie creates a lot of discussion in terms of empathy, as well as at what point are we allowed to forgive and look past people's previous mistakes? Now, something I realized while I was watching this movie was, because of the subject matter, the movie is marketed as a rom-com, dark rom-com, in my opinion. And when I say it gets dark, it's a very dark subject matter, but at the end of the day, it's a rom-com, dark rom-com. So subject matter, by any means, is not funny. It's not funny, especially as somebody who sees the news frequently. It's not funny. I think the thing that really stuck out to me about this was, this movie is going to be nuanced, but also polarizing because of the subject matter. This movie was the first time in a long time where I think it's allowing its viewers to explore multi-layered theatrical content. And I feel like in a day and age, and we'll get into this a little bit more later, but in a day and age where everybody feels like everything is right or wrong with no gray area in between, I think that's why this movie is going to stir up as much conversations as it has and as it will. Because like I said, there are points during the movie where I felt uncomfortable and even angry and even questioned my position on where I stood with Emma. But I also found myself laughing at the jokes that were said, because some of the moments in the movie were actually ridiculous. It was like ridiculous in a theatrical comedic way because it felt very unserious. But then in the back of my mind, I'm like, but this is a serious topic, so why am I laughing? Well, that's the point of a rom-com. It's a romantic comedy. We're supposed to be laughing. But it really stirs up the question for me. And, well, let me not say stirs up the question. But like I said, it stirred up the statement that this is going to be the most polarizing movie of the year. I literally left the theater and my sister said, that was a movie. And I'm here. Oh, this was a really good movie. Minimum 4.5 stars. I liked it and she thought it was just a movie. And I was speaking to her about it yesterday and she said, I want to watch it again because it was one of those movies where I feel like you enjoy it the more you watch it despite its dark matter. Now, leaving the theater, the first thing that I thought of was, one, this is super unserious and one of probably the most unserious movie I've ever seen. It was a very unserious movie tackling a very serious topic and nuanced approach to something that is triggering for people who have to potentially see it every day, but also have victims in the situation of the thing that Emma did. And something really dawned upon me because dark comedy has always been a thing in media. It has always been a thing in human nature. A lot of people use jokes and comedy to cope with dark topics because it lightens the mood, it makes it not feel as heavy, and that's just always been a thing. But what really surprised me about this is that we have known Hollywood to not take risk or take chances on really any new ideas anymore, let alone such current events. I think the only time we really saw media take chances on current events was like when we had COVID seasons and COVID related movies. But I feel like despite a lot of them not being good because we had strikes going on shortly after that or even during that, I don't remember much of that time, trauma blocking it out. But we had things such as COVID related media, and you can even say things such as like Twin Towers, that occurrence happening. We have media revolving that. We have media involving wars and stuff. And it really makes me think the director and writers of this movie definitely did not play it safe. And especially considering we're in a time in media where a lot of people play it safe, it was almost refreshing from an artistic standpoint to see a team of writers, producers, directors, and actors not play it safe. And this is where I have to approach the topic of this very, very, very carefully because I definitely don't want to come off as insensitive because, like I said, literally the subject matter in this movie is very much a prominent part in a culture that is very close to home. So I definitely will be taking a little bit of extra time to make sure I'm stepping and saying things properly. I actually want to start this podcast, funnily enough. One of the reasons I want to start it was to practice how I speak so I can get better at speaking and voicing my opinion in a way that isn't as chaotic all the time and just using a bunch of filler to like get a point across, you know? Hold on, let me sip. And I've always struggled with getting my point across because I don't think I have the tools to really encapsulate what I mean to get my point across. And sometimes I feel like I don't have the skill to do so. But I definitely am approaching this with a lot of empathy, which is a really, really, really big theme of the movie, unironically enough. But yeah, like I was saying, the director did not play it safe one bit. I didn't know much about the director before I went into the movie. I actually didn't know who directed it until after. I think he was able to produce a very conversationally rich film while also making a movie that was, like I said, very polarizing. I feel like people either like the movie or they hate it / don't like it. There's no in between. I haven't really seen anybody say they were indifferent. I definitely have seen nothing but people fall on either sides of the spectrum due to its subject matter. And I think in an era where a lot of people are a lot more cautious about the things that they say for good reason because you don't want things to be misconstrued or taken out of context, it's very easy to create media that starts a lot of conversations. But the conversations that follow up with said media are what matters. And I think the hard part about making media that creates conversations, well, I missaid that. It's not easy to make media that starts conversations, especially considering we're in a very polarizing part in the timeline where something's either right or wrong. So being able to provide on a silver platter with Zendaya at the middle of it, who is for the most part a universally accepted and respected actress, considering how young she is, to put her in the middle of that as a character to talk about and revolve around something as dark and wrong as what was talked about in the movie, it makes me think, when is it okay to make media about ongoing and traumatic events? Because like I said, there's a very certain culture that is impacted with the subject matter within the movie. And like I said, I am trying to step around spoilers as much as I can. And like I said, it really makes me wonder, when is it going to be okay to talk about traumatic events? When is it okay to make media and art revolving around traumatic events? Like I said, we have media talking about Twin Towers, different wars, different traumatic historical events. But when is it okay to actually make media about that? Especially when you take on the task of making it have a underlying comedic tone that makes people uncomfortable. Which leads me to my next topic, which is the lost art of nuanced media. I think because we are in such a polarizing time in the timeline, especially with social media, people have polarizing takes all the time because it's good for clicks, views, and engagement. And it's very easy to kind of understand somebody based on a polarizing standpoint. But I think something that we lost I'm not really sure where it started. Some may say COVID, some may say earlier or further back than that. But I think we lost the art of being challenged within our opinions, within our perspectives. Now, there are some things that are just downright wrong. But then that also stems from, well, why do you think it's wrong? See how there's always some like gray area there. And because we're not challenged anymore when it comes to our perspectives and point of views and opinions, and things such as human rights, those are things that should not be, there's a right and a wrong. Human rights are very basic things. There's things that, in my opinion, which could also be, I couldn't be challenged on it, but things like human rights, those are things that are basic, things, but people challenge things such as human rights. Who deserves this? Who says you deserve that? What makes you think you deserve that? In my opinion, stuff like that doesn't need to be challenged because there is a right and there's a wrong. But because a lot of people don't do a lot of challenging these days, people aren't uncomfortable anymore. People aren't uncomfortable anymore. And we don't allow ourselves to be uncomfortable anymore. And funnily enough, when I was outlining this very short outline for this podcast episode, before I even asked my mom to borrow her wedding dress, I remember a quote very frequently that my mom told us when we were younger, that the things that make us the most uncomfortable are probably the things that we should talk about the most. The things that make us the most uncomfortable are the things we're most scared to speak on and speak about, whether it be with others, a professional, or even looking within ourselves, are probably the things that we should speak about the most. And I say that because art and media has never been comfortable, ever. It's always been there to push the limits. It's always been there to provide gray area. It's always been there to start conversations. But I feel like in recent years, creators are okay with being comfortable, and there's so many reasons as to why being safe and playing it safe is better than risk, whether it be you want to hit a certain number at the box office, so capitalism as well as reputation, etc. But I think when we stopped allowing ourselves to not be in a black and white conversation, that's when we began losing the plot. And the plot has been getting more and more lost as the years go by. Now, like I said, there are some things that are just straight up wrong and rooted in disgusting and traumatic history. I'm not talking about stuff like that. Like, I'm not talking about the Jubilee videos that are debating like 20 conservatives versus one liberal over human rights. Like, we're not talking about that. There are very basic things that are wrong. So we're not talking about stuff like that. But like I said earlier, as I was watching the movie follows something that's very traumatic and happens a lot for a very certain culture that is very close to home. And I found myself laughing at the jokes because of how unserious it actually is. And it made me begin to question myself and ask things such as, am I allowed to or supposed to be laughing at such heavy-hitting and traumatic experiences, especially considering they aren't mine? And as I was watching the movie, I found myself feeling empathy for everybody involved, Emma included, despite what the worst thing she had ever done been. Charlie included, Rachel included. And me personally, when stuff like this happens, I've never felt empathy for people who do something similar to what Emma did / planned to do. I've never turned on the news and seen something like that happen and felt empathy for the person to do something remotely close or even like took it all the way, as the movie's plot like talked about. So then it made me wonder, why am I doing that right now in the theater? And I came to a very, 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 very quick answer. It's because that's the point of the movie. That's the point. And I think this further opens up a discussion about why humans act and carry on the way that they do. And I think a prime example of another piece of media that I remembered off the top of my head that reminded me so much of this when I was watching the movie is a certain episode in Grey's Anatomy when a serial is brought to Seattle Grace and Meredith Grey feels indifferent towards this man because on paper, he has done a lot of bad things. He harmed a lot of people. That's not good. We are told that's not good. Derek even says, why are you empathizing with somebody who did such heinous things? And she can't explain it. But that further opens up the complexities of human emotion, empathy, and why do we feel such empathy towards people who have done bad things? And I found a quote from a Vogue article. I'll link it down below if you want to read it. And the quote reads, "If you are looking for a film that will push you toward a deeper analysis of society and your own moral values, the drama may well impress you." And I think that's a perfect way to encapsulate this movie and what I think it was made for. I think this movie was made to push the boundaries in media. I think it was made to start conversation. And I think it was made to allow people the space to question themselves, their moral compass, and really begin to question, what are my boundaries? Why are my boundaries like that? When is something okay? When is something not okay? And I think this movie makes a lot of people uncomfortable because usually, like I said, we are told and taught things are good or bad. But when humans begin to act like humans, that's where gray area comes from. Things are black and white. And things get uncomfortable with gray area because now we're questioning our moral values, our moral standpoints. And a lot of people get uncomfortable with gray area because it's not a surefire thing. There's very little things that we can control and that are black and white. But usually when people are black and white within their beliefs, they feel more comfortable in them because that's their standpoint and you can't argue them on it because you're not pushing them, right? For example, the Grey's Anatomy episode. The man has harmed a lot of people. He's literally a serial, not a good person. He harmed a bunch of people. But as Meredith is going throughout her days and her shift in the hospital and she's getting to know this man, she can't even explain why she's empathizing with somebody who has done such bad things. And I think it really opens up the why do humans act like that conversation. And because we don't have a surefire answer, it makes people uncomfortable. Being uncomfortable is probably one of the best things that can ever happen to a person. And we always talk about things about leaving our comfort zone, this, that, and the third. Yet people only do that and want to get put in their comfort zone to grow. Yet when it comes to pushing limits and personal beliefs and where their moral standpoint is specifically, people don't like doing that. And like my mom always said, the things that make us uncomfortable, the things we don't want to talk about the most are probably the things that we should talk about. A lot of people use getting out of their comfort zone with a move or moving to a new city, a new country, traveling alone as a way to get out of their comfort zone. But when are we going to allow ourselves to get out of our comfort zones when it comes to ideologies? Now, I'm going to keep prefacing this. We are taught things are right and wrong, black and white. And some things are, in fact, just right or wrong, black and white. But the way we approach how we view them and how we emotionally connect to them is what makes humans so interesting, in my opinion. I'm always going to keep going back to Meredith Grey because that episode is so interesting to me from a psychological and emotional standpoint. Because, like I said, Derek spoke to her and said, he did bad things. You do not empathize with somebody like this. And she couldn't even figure out what to do. She literally went to his execution. And she was nothing but his doctor. There are several times within that show where somebody has done a bad thing on paper and the doctor, one of the doctors, two of the doctors think that they have no right to save them, but they still have to do it anyway. And it really opens up the conversation as why do humans act like that? As in, why am I empathizing with somebody who has inherently done a bad thing? And I just think this movie is a perfect example of that while taking on the tone of it being a comedy, as well as the performances, as well as some of the extremely unserious parts in this movie. I'm not going to say what they are, but they are very unserious. But it just really opens up the conversation to everybody wants to get out of their comfort zone until it's time to speak on personal ideologies and beliefs. Now, like I'm going to keep saying it because I don't play about a lot of things. But when it comes to morally gray areas, I think the biggest umbrella of things that people don't like to question is empathy. I just saw a TikTok the other day to where somebody said insecure people and narcissistic people are one and the same. All they think about is themselves. But the reason a lot of people pity insecure people basically is because nobody thinks that it's nice to live within their own head and make themselves the center of attention all the time. The only thing that makes a insecure person and a narcissistic person, differentiate is where those behaviors, how they come out to other people. And they were basically just explaining how they were two sides of the same coin, but one is socially acceptable and gets empathy versus the other based on how they go about it. And I thought that was a very interesting TikTok. If I can link it down below, if I can find it to link it down below, I absolutely will, because it definitely challenged my beliefs when it comes to people with because people with insecurities are not insecure people. They're talking about insecure people, not people with insecurities. I think everybody has insecurities, but that doesn't inherently make you an insecure person. But at the end of the day, I think a lot of the media I've been consuming, funnily enough, and I didn't plan for this, but a lot of it has to deal with, where do we draw the line with empathy? Where do we as humans, or not even as humans, as individuals, draw that line? And I think allowing these conversations to brew up, if they're done in a productive way, allows us to understand ourselves in a way, 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 way more complex way, instead of just things being black and white, because nothing is black and white. Well, some stuff is, but even then, some people can argue that nothing is black and white. Now, to me, some things are just right and wrong, but even then, seeing things like this in the theaters with a crowd full of people, which, by the way, if you can, definitely see this with a good amount of people in the theater, because it makes the viewing experience a lot more enjoyable. In my personal opinion, it made it really enjoyable for me and my sister. It was actually a really fun viewing experience despite the heavy topic. But even then, allowing yourself to explore gray area and unknown territory allows you to grow. And consuming media that pushes your boundaries in terms of what you think is right and wrong is another way to grow. And I think my generation, Gen Z, I feel like I've talked about this a little bit on the podcast, but we're a very polarizing generation, because if you think about it, we're the real first generation with social media. And a lot of things on social media are very polarizing. We have, and I even took part in things such as unpopular opinions and whatnot, but it's polarizing because polarizing things get engagement, views, whoop-de-whoop. But when you start trickling in a little bit of gray area, now you're not questioning a person, but pushing a person to further think about their position and where they stand on something. And instead of people seeing that as a learning experience and understanding experience, they take it as, well, I'm right and you're wrong. And like I said, I'm going to keep saying it. I hate to sound like a broken record, but there are some things that are inherently right and wrong. But I think the thing that makes this movie so interesting to me is that it's bringing in topics that are inherently wrong, yet a lot of people are empathizing with one of our main protagonists, Emma, as well as our main protagonist, Charlie, because he was thrown absolutely into something. He had no idea about the person he's about to marry. His ignorance was, in fact, bliss. He was living and breathing and loving somebody who something, the worst thing that she's done, he had no idea about because they never brought this up. And you can't really question something or start to shift your perspective and learn more about yourself until it's in front of you. And I think it's okay to push and question empathy and things like that, because like I said, I think gray area is needed, especially in the arts. There's no black and white, absolutely, in the arts. And this movie's a prime example of that. But I think where a lot of people go wrong when it comes to pushing the boundaries and questioning things and wondering, okay, well, what's right and wrong? Because like I said, there are things on paper that are inherently and 100% wrong. But at the same time, does that mean there's no gray area with them? And this movie's a prime example of that. And I think, like I said, this is going to be one of the most polarizing movies that have ever hit the media in a while, in my opinion, just because of its subject matter and how it was used and played into the comedic tone and whatnot. But like I said, I had a good time at my viewing, and I felt every emotion during my viewing under the sun. I was anxious, I was excited, I was happy, I was enamored, I was angry and frustrated, and there was a little bit of hate and side eyeing in my heart when the movie was going about. There was spite, there was anticipation. Everything you can think of, I felt in that less than 2 hour movie, that 1 hour and like 45-minute movie. And I think, like I said, this is going to open up a lot of conversations, but I think the only way these conversations are going to be productive is if and when they happen, if they're done properly, because like I said, social media has made a lot of people super polarizing and don't allow themselves to be comfortable and have uncomfortable conversations such as this in terms of this subject matter. And I think the thing that I'm really excited to see is the people who are having these productive conversations, and we see people looking and questioning how far their empathy goes, because that is a part of the story. And the thing that makes this super intriguing to me is everybody's experience with this movie is going to be different, because everybody has a different walk of life and nobody is the same two people. And that's what I think makes humans so interesting and beautiful, because we go about life, everybody has a different walk of life, and nobody's had the same experience twice in their own unique way. Even if you have the same experience as somebody else, that does not mean you have the same feelings, emotions, and timing and things like that as somebody else. So I'm excited to see the heavy on productive conversations that happen in regards to this movie, because it's a very gray area movie and it's pushing the limits, it's pushing the boundaries in terms of conversations and when are things appropriate to talk about. And also open up the question, is it too soon to make content about something such as this? If it is, when is it going to be okay? And that leads to a follow-up question that I have is it an artist's job to protect its viewers and consumers from touchy topics? And if it is, to what capacity is that? Because we've seen artists who want a certain demographic, but they can't help but attract a different one because of their previous actions and how they went about creating their previous art, and they can't shake that viewership and group of consumers away from them no matter how hard they try. So does that mean that they should close themselves off from a whole different type of media and art that they want to make just because their consumers are a certain demographic and they can't necessarily relate to what they're really talking about? Is the artist group of viewers the determining factor for the art that they are making? No, but to what capacity? Because it's a partnership, really. Artists make stuff for people, and especially in the age of social media, creators and artists make things for people. But how much do we really necessarily have to take into account when we are making said media, art, and content? Because it's a trade-off. These people help keep your lights on. They help you get to where you are. But at the same time, if you're letting them control you and put you into this machine, how authentic are you really being to your true and deepest creative and darkest self? How true are you being to your soul, essentially? And like I said, we've seen so many people go through this. I feel like the list goes on and on. But I think although the themes of the movie will be brought up, I'm really excited to see the secondary wave of conversation that comes from this, really detailing the questions I just had in terms of artistic touch and capabilities and things like that, because it is a two-way street. Essentially, when it comes to that, you create art, people consume it. The people let you know what you like. Do you want to make more? Do you want to switch it up? Things like that. But I think overall, the Drama 2026, I always tell people to go and watch movies and get their own opinion on them. And I've gotten a few people DM me say that they went and saw it and they enjoyed it and they went based on my review. And that means a lot, but I think a lot of people need to stop butting in on conversations about media they haven't even seen, because I've seen a lot of people talk about this movie and I read the comments, and people are continuing the conversation in the comments and somebody's like, "Oh, I only saw a clip of the movie." It's very hard for people to conceptualize these days that you need full context to make a full idea on something with layers, very onion. You can't just base something off of one clip and one TikTok. I watch content talking about this movie, and I've heard so many different perspectives and this, that, and the third. People who think this movie's not okay, it's too soon. But I've also seen people who say movies like this are needed. And I'm in that group of people who say movies like this are needed. But that doesn't mean I'm going to shut down people who say this movie's absolutely so insensitive and it's too much. Because at the end of the day, gray area helps people think, helps people critically think, and no shade. That's why we have a literal media illiteracy epidemic, because people don't look at things that challenge their own beliefs. Being able to critically think and think outside yourself is a really big part in consuming art, and being able to understand more people. You don't have to change your perspective, but being able to critically think about challenging and opposing views makes you a more empathetic, big-brained person. Because if you're not hearing other people out with opposing views, how are you supposed to grow and change your mindset on anything? You can't grow on something if you don't really know what's there. It's like building a house. You can't have a 3-story house without a solid foundation of what's going on. So prime example, having a solid foundation to partake in these conversations would be watching the movie. People are talking about things when they don't understand the movie's themes. And I'm not saying you have to partake in like the media to talk about it, because media is media and buzz is buzz. People are going to talk whether they want to or not, or whether they've seen the movie or not. But I think a lot of people always try to give a full opinion on something they have tuned into, or they didn't give the time of day to, fully indulge themselves in and try to understand past, is this right or wrong? You know what I mean? So, with that being said, I feel like this was definitely a different type of episode. I definitely think I put on my college degree hat on this episode, my writing, rhetoric, and digital studies degree. This is literally what I did for 3 years in college. Actually, technically 2.5, but whatever. And I want to end this podcast episode with just my overarching opinion on the movie as a whole. So I personally enjoyed the movie. I definitely knew the buzz that was coming from the movie based on the subject matter alone. But overall, I enjoyed the movie. Despite what it's about, I enjoyed it. I love the nuances. It's very onion, very layered. I loved it. And I'm usually not a comedy person, but I found myself actively giggling and laughing like out loud at some of the jokes and being like, "Oh, they're so unserious. This is so stupid. Like, what?" And that was new to me. And it made me realize, hey, maybe I should give comedy movies another try. You know the vibes. Like I said, the performances were so well done. The characters felt so lived in. I loved watching my personal friends, Charlie and Emma, get ready for their wedding. And I love movies that get people talking. As somebody in the most polarizing generation ever, Gen Z is so annoying and have a no gray area problem, but I digress. Overall, I can't wait to watch this movie again. I think this movie is going to get a lot of people chattering. I cannot wait to see it. I talked to so many people on my main account story when I posted my review on it, because I saw it before it came out and many people didn't see it before then. So I was like, "Ooh, period. Like, yeah, it's giving a list. Wow, that's me, your favorite movie reviewer." Mwah. And on that note, I really think if you are interested in seeing something that is going to challenge your beliefs and make you question your stance on what the movie's actually about, not what the movie's about, but question how you approach empathy. And like I said, further, I didn't even really touch on the question such as like, are we always our past selves? In a world of cancel culture, girl, like I said, Some stuff is dead wrong to me. But in a world of cancel culture, the first question I immediately thought of when it came out and when Emma was making her case about what happened and explaining it, it really, really, really made me think, because of this, does this mean people are always going to be attached to their personal selves, or do people not allow them to grow and change? And I could go on and on and on about that and development and things like that. And I think one of the touches I really liked in the movie specifically is when after Charlie found out about what Emma, her worst thing that she's done, he could only really picture her younger self with him. So literally it was like Charlie, like there was literally a montage of like Charlie with Emma's younger self, and the actress who played young Zendaya, what a flex, and she did a fantastic job. And then it really made me think, like, are we always that person that we once were, or are we allowed to grow? And if we are, what's the cap on that, if there is any? So before I get on my soapbox again, I'm going to close off the episode right here because I have been yapping for quite a bit. If you guys like this episode, make sure you give the video a thumbs up if you're on YouTube. Make sure you rate the podcast. Leave me a comment on YouTube or on Spotify, wherever you're listening. Make sure you follow the podcast on YouTube, Spotify, Instagram, TikTok, and whatnot, so you can see me every single Wednesday. Make sure you rate the podcast if you're on Spotify. If you've been tuning in for a few weeks, that would help us out a lot. I'm talking about me. It would help me out a lot. And I really cannot wait to see your hot takes, or not even just hot takes, but takes on this movie in general, whether you've seen it or you're just addressing some of the questions that I talked about within this podcast episode. And like I said, I definitely did my best to try not to spoil most of the plot. I hope I didn't give too much away. It's very hard to talk about this without kind of giving it away, so I hope I did like kind of an okay job. But yeah, my little call to action for you all is definitely go out, see the drama 2026. I think it was a very enjoyable movie. And with that being said, I cannot wait to see you again next Wednesday with yet another episode of the Predictably Unpredictable podcast, where the only thing predictable about us is that we are unpredictable, hence the wedding dress. I hope you all have an amazing rest of your day, and I will see you next week. Bye, everybody. Love you down.